I had been living in the house for months after Bradley's death, trying to heal from the loss. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Bradley's laughter, once so lively, now echoed only in my memories. It was a Tuesday evening when I heard the knock at the door, sharp and insistent. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected anyone, and the sudden interruption made the air in the house feel thick with unease. I wasn't sure what I expected to find when I opened the door, but it certainly wasn't Marcus and Rita standing there, looking as though they had been waiting for this moment. My mother-in-law's eyes were shadowed with something I couldn't quite place, and Marcus, her son, seemed unusually tense. "We need to talk," Rita said, her voice unnaturally calm, though I could see the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. I barely had time to respond before Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with a mix of determination and desperation. "It's about the will," he said, his voice low but sharp. That was all he needed to say for me to understand. They were here for something more than just a conversation. They came in without waiting for an invitation, their presence in the house like an unspoken tension hanging in the air. I gestured for them to sit, my mind racing. What could they possibly want? I had already gone through the will Bradley left me after his death. It was straightforward, leaving everything to me, his beloved wife. But as I watched them, something told me they weren't here to discuss that. Rita's hands trembled slightly as she placed a thick envelope on the coffee table. I stared at it, an unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. "We've come to talk about the will," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a strange urgency. Rita glanced at him, almost as if waiting for him to say more. But he fell silent. I hesitated, reaching for the envelope slowly. As my fingers brushed against the paper, I felt a chill, as though something was wrong. I opened it, unfolding the contents with careful precision. There it was, a new will, Bradley's signature, but dated only a week before his death. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the will Bradley had left me. This was a new version, one that left everything to Rita and Marcus. I couldn't believe it. Had Bradley been coerced? Was this their doing? The world seemed to slow as I stared at the new will in my hands. My thoughts raced. How could Bradley, a man who had always been kind, generous, and thoughtful, have left everything to Rita and Marcus? The more I looked at it, the more I realized something was off. The signature seemed shaky, not like Bradley at all. And the date, just days before his passing, was troubling. I had known Bradley for over 15 years, and I couldn't imagine him changing his will in such a way, especially not under these circumstances. Something wasn't right. I stood up suddenly, my heart pounding. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my gaze. "It's Bradley's will. He changed it shortly before he passed. He wanted us to have everything," he said, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I turned to Rita, hoping for a different response, but her face was grim, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of guilt and defiance. "Bradley wanted this," she said firmly, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Something was wrong, and I needed to find out what. I couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in my chest. This new will felt like a lie, a manipulation. I had to know the truth. I needed to find out what had really happened in those final days of Bradley's life. Without saying a word, I excused myself and left the room, heading straight for the study. It was Bradley's space, where he kept all his important documents, the place where I had found the first will, the one that left everything to me. I rifled through the drawers, the familiar scent of old paper filling the air. As I dug deeper, my hands trembling, I found something that made my heart race, a recording device. It was small, inconspicuous, but the red light on it indicated that it had been used recently. My breath caught in my throat. Could this be the evidence I needed? I quickly played the recording, my hands shaking. The voice that filled the room was Bradley's, but he sounded weak, exhausted. I'm signing it because I have no choice, he whispered. Hazel, please forgive me. The recording ended abruptly. I was frozen, the weight of what I had just heard crashing over me. Bradley had been coerced. He hadn't signed that will willingly. I couldn't hold back the rush of emotions as I walked back into the living room. I held the recording device in my hand, my grip tight, and my voice filled with a mix of fury and heartbreak. You did this to him, I said, my words sharp. Rita and Marcus stood up immediately, their faces pale. What is that? Marcus asked, his eyes wide with fear. I pressed the button, playing the recording out loud for them to hear. Bradley's voice, so fragile and filled with regret, filled the room. You heard him, I said quietly, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. He didn't do this willingly. You forced him. Rita's face contorted with guilt, and Marcus took a step back, his eyes darting between me and the recording. You're twisting this, Rita said, her voice defensive but shaky. We only wanted to make sure Bradley's wishes were respected. Respect? I repeated, my voice rising. This isn't respect. This is manipulation. You took advantage of him at his weakest moment. The room seemed to grow colder, the tension thickening like a storm cloud ready to break. Marcus and Rita began to argue back, but their words were meaningless to me. I knew what had happened, and no amount of denial could change that. Bradley told me everything, I said, my voice firm. He told me you forced him to sign that will. He told me you threatened him, used his illness against him to get what you wanted. Rita's face flushed with anger. You don't understand, she spat. Bradley was dying. We had to make sure the right people were taken care of. You wouldn't understand. You weren't there. Her words stung, but I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into sympathy. I was there, I said coldly. I was the one who stayed by his side, day and night, watching him suffer while you were nowhere to be found. And now you want to take everything he worked for? You don't deserve any of it. Marcus clenched his fists. You don't know what you're talking about, he growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Bradley would have wanted us to have it. You're just trying to take it all for yourself. The accusation hung in the air, but I refused to be drawn into it. The truth was clear, and I wasn't going to back down. I knew this battle wasn't over, and I needed more proof. I wasn't about to let Rita and Marcus get away with what they had done. I needed to know exactly what had happened in those final days at the hospital. The next day, I went to the hospital where Bradley had been treated. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I had a feeling that something in the records would give me the final piece of the puzzle. After some persuasion, I was granted access to the surveillance footage from the hospital. My heart raced as I sat in front of the screen, watching the grainy footage of the hospital room where Bradley had spent his final days. The image was clear enough for me to see Rita and Marcus entering the room. The footage showed them sitting by Bradley's bedside, talking in low voices. They were smiling, their expressions too pleased for people who should have been grieving. As the footage continued, I saw the moment when they pressured Bradley to sign the will. Rita was standing over him, and Marcus was holding the pen in front of his trembling hand. Bradley's face was pale, his body weak, but it was the look in his eyes that broke my heart. He was scared. He was being forced. The footage was undeniable. I had what I needed now. Bradley's last days had been filled with fear, manipulated by the very people he should have been able to trust the most. I returned home, determined to confront them once and for all. I called Rita and Marcus to meet me at the house, but this time, I wasn't going to play their game. When they arrived, they could see the change in my demeanor. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. I sat them down and played the footage from the hospital on the TV screen. As they watched, their faces twisted with panic. You think this will stop me? Marcus said, his voice trembling but defiant. You're nothing but a meddler, Hazel. This will never hold up in court. But the fear in his eyes told a different story. They knew they were done. The truth had been exposed, and no matter how hard they tried to deny it, the evidence was irrefutable. I stood up and looked at them, my voice steady. You can try to deny it all you want, but the truth is out. Bradley was coerced, and now I will make sure he gets the justice he deserves. The legal battle began shortly after the confrontation. I filed charges against Rita and Marcus for elder abuse and forgery. The courts moved quickly, and soon enough, the hearings were underway. Rita and Marcus tried to defend themselves, but their stories didn't hold up under scrutiny. The footage from the hospital, along with the recording of Bradley's voice, made it clear that they had manipulated him in his final days. The emotional toll was immense, but I stayed strong. I knew I was fighting for Bradley's memory, for his dignity. Days turned into weeks, and the trial dragged on, but I never wavered. I had the truth on my side. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Rita and Marcus were ordered to pay restitution and face charges for their actions. But it wasn't about the money for me. It was about ensuring that Bradley's legacy wasn't tainted by their greed. The aftermath of the trial was quieter than I had expected. Rita and Marcus went their separate ways, humiliated and broken. The house, once filled with their lies and manipulation, was finally at peace. But even though I had won, it didn't feel like a victory. I had fought to honor Bradley's memory, but I couldn't bring him back. He was gone, and no amount of justice could change that. I spent the next few months in solitude, trying to heal, to move forward. There were days when I could feel his presence in the house, as if he were still there, watching over me, and other days when the silence felt deafening. But I knew one thing for certain. I had honored his last wishes, and that was all I could do. Over time, I began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt lost without Bradley. But slowly, I started to rebuild my life. The house that once felt so empty began to feel like home again. I redecorated, filled the rooms with light and warmth. It wasn't the same without Bradley, but it was mine. I had taken back control, and for the first time in months, I began to find peace. I would never forget what happened, the lies, the manipulation, but I had learned something valuable, that the truth always comes to light. No matter how hard they tried to hide it, I had exposed their treachery. And for that, I could finally let go. As the years passed, I found myself moving forward. The memories of Bradley's death and the battle over his estate faded, replaced by new experiences and relationships. I traveled, met new people, and rebuilt my life in a way I never thought possible. But Bradley's memory never left me. I carried him in my heart, and every day I honored the lessons he taught me. To be strong, to stand up for what's right, and to never let anyone take away what I deserved. The past was behind me now, and the future was mine to create. With each passing day, I moved closer to the life I had always wanted, free from the shadows of the past, and as I looked forward, I knew one thing for sure. No one would ever take away my peace again.
Even though he was only 35 years old, David Adams was a person of rigid principles. He was the proud owner of a string of gas stations dispersed across the northern state. These gas stations constituted a reliable and substantial source of income for David. Everything seemed perfect except for a persistent problem at one particular station. David was perplexed by the issue plaguing this specific location. He made it a point to pay the staff well and on time, and was lenient with days off as per their requirements. But for some inexplicable reason, this gas station was subjected to harsh reviews and was a frequent target for shoplifters. Shoplifters weren't stealing fuel, of course, but merchandise from the store. David tried reviewing the security footage, but the theft was either extremely subtle or the problem lied elsewhere. Furthermore, it was challenging to determine if the employees were involved, as there was no discernible suspicion behavior from the customers either. Although troubled, David was cautious about accusing his employees without concrete evidence. Despite the unpleasant circumstances, he strived to maintain his composure. One weekend, David and his old friend Tom Jenkins attended a basketball game. David was fond of blending business with pleasure, often combining formal meetings with leisurely activities. Tom was once David's business rival. Before David ventured into the gas business, he operated a tire store. He and Tom owned competing tire shops on opposing sides of the same road. Initially, they shared a strong friendship, but as more customers flocked to David's store, Tom initiated an aggressive campaign to outdo his competition. Their friendship swiftly morphed into rivalry, leading to a cessation of communication between them. However, at one point, David had an epiphany. He realized he was losing sight of his values in the heat of the competition. He didn't want to win at the expense of his former friend. In a stroke of ingenuity, he proposed a change in their marketing strategy. David decided to prioritize integrity and acknowledge that there was more than enough business to go around. He wanted to move away from negative comparisons with Tom's shop, focusing instead on their own merits. David's revamped marketing communication emphasized the products they offered to meet customers' needs and facilitate their journey into the future. They highlighted their excellent customer service offered at competitive prices. Above all, David understood that he and Tom could cater to distinct customer bases without undermining each other. David's business relationship with Tom blossomed into a steadfast friendship. In fact, it was Tom who first suggested that David enter the gas station business. After their basketball game, they visited a quiet cafe to discuss several issues. Among them, David confided in Tom about the puzzling shoplifting incidents at one of his gas stations. After giving it some thought, Tom proposed a simple solution. "Why don't you bring in employees from other branches?" Tom suggested. David was initially baffled. "What do you mean?" Tom clarified. "You have branches that are performing well, correct? And managers who are successfully running those stations, right?" "Okay," David replied, starting to understand. "You should bring them in because they know what to do, and they know how to run things efficiently. See if anything changes." "But won't that jeopardize the other branches if their effective managers leave?" David queried. Tom acknowledged his concerns but countered, "Yes, I understand your worry. However, I see two benefits here. First, you're attempting to resolve an existing issue, and second, you're offering another employee an opportunity to prove their managerial skills." Convinced by Tom's advice, David selected a few high-performing employees and a manager from his other branches and transferred them to the problematic station. While some declined the offer, the truly loyal ones agreed without hesitation. To David's astonishment, the issue at the troubled gas station was quickly resolved. Positive reviews began flooding in, and order was restored. The gas station started functioning efficiently, and profits were on the rise. Although shoplifting hadn't completely ceased, it had become considerably less frequent. However, a new problem soon arose. Among the transferred employees was a gas attendant named Harry. After working at the new station for a couple of months, he expressed a desire to return to his old branch or even quit. Two of his colleagues also chose to resign. Intrigued by the situation, David decided to personally investigate the matter. He drove to the gas station and invited Harry into the back office for a chat. "Why do you want to return to your old station? After all, I'm paying you more here," David asked. Harry waved his hand dismissively. "I appreciate the increased pay, sir, but no amount of money can compensate for the stress. I'm just exhausted from her constant criticism, whether it's about my attire, my customer service, or even the way I handle the pump. She never stops. If it was only work-related, I could bear it, but she started commenting on my personal life too. Just the other day, my wife stopped by, and I stepped away to speak to her. I was told to manage my family affairs after work hours. No, sir, I appreciate everything, but I simply can't work with these people. Please transfer me back or let me go. I'll find something else." David exhaled heavily. He understood where Harry was coming from. The problem seemed to lie with the manager. She was an efficient worker, thorough and meticulous, but her management style was apparently causing distress among the staff. However, Margaret was also a major source of workplace gossip and friction. While she excelled at her duties, she fell short in personal interactions and leadership qualities. David was at a loss regarding how to handle the situation. He planned to have a friendly chat with Margaret about it, though the idea itself made him grin cynically. Margaret was a woman of a certain age, known for her idiosyncratic personality. Harry, the gas attendant, left in a huff, even quitting his job at the station. Now, David had another issue to deal with. He needed to find a replacement, at least temporarily, until he could hire a long-term employee. Stepping outside, he noticed a young woman nearby. Her clothing was worn and her thin frame suggested she was struggling. It was clear that she was going through a rough patch. She stood near the gas station, lost in thought, showing no intent to drive or buy anything from the shop. Suddenly, an audacious idea popped into David's mind. He approached the young woman and asked, "Excuse me, do you need anything?" Startled, she looked up at him, then smiled. "I'm sorry, I was just wondering if there's any work around here." "Really? That's fantastic. What kind of work were you looking for?" "Anything, honestly. I learned quickly and am willing to take on any job." David considered her for a moment. "Do you have any papers?" Yes. It's just that lately I've had some issues and..." Anticipating that she may not have the papers, David interrupted her. "Come with me." He led the way back to the building, a sense of excitement in his steps. The young woman followed him to the office, where he asked her to wait at the door. He walked into Margaret's office, the eyes of the entire office following him. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Nelson." Margaret, in the midst of a tea break, choked a little on her drink and stood up. "Hello, Mr. Adams. I'm sorry about this. Please come in." Margaret was a full-figured woman. Having tried and failed multiple diets and exercise routines, she always seemed to gain more weight than she lost. For some reason, David had always associated plump people with kindness, but Margaret was an exception to his theory. The larger she got, the more irritable she seemed to become. Some speculated that her perpetual single status and dedication to her work were factors in her unhappiness. When asked why she never married, she simply responded that it was hard to find someone who could handle her. "Mrs. Nelson, the gas station's rumors aren't my concern. I'm here to address the fact that another gas jockey has quit." Margaret looked visibly taken aback. "Who knows what goes through their heads? Maybe they've breathed in too much petrol fumes," she suggested. David dismissed her flippant response. He knew she was instrumental to the station's operations, so firing her was not an option. "Mrs. Nelson, I'm not planning to dig deeper into this issue today, but I have a new recruit waiting outside. If she also quits within a month, I'll have to investigate further." "A girl? We need a sturdy bloke to pump gas, not a girl." David's voice grew stern. "I think you're overstepping your boundaries, Mrs. Nelson. It's my Cole who works here." Margaret bit her lip, not accustomed to being put in her place. In her mind, her hard work and dedication were the backbone of the station's success. If it weren't for her, David's business would have crumbled long ago. David was a wise leader, however. He allowed his employees room for autonomy. Although finding replacements wasn't difficult, he valued maintaining a harmonious workplace. The new recruit, Samantha, was a fast learner. She grasped her responsibilities within an hour and wasted no time in getting to work. Before David left, she had already tidied up the recycling bins around the station. Before driving off, David took Samantha aside. "Please write down my number and text me your clothing and shoe sizes. I'll arrange a uniform for you. And remember, if the manager gives you a hard time, don't hesitate to call me." Samantha smiled appreciatively. "Thanks a lot. I can handle it. I've dealt with tougher bosses." David eyed the new employee with surprise. Samantha seemed more capable than her appearance suggested. Over the following 3 weeks, David was swamped and couldn't visit the branch. He was concerned, but Margaret's brief and positive reports reassured him that everything was running smoothly. When he found the spare moment, he decided to drop by unannounced. He parked a short distance away, choosing to observe from his car before making his presence known. A car rolled into the gas station, and Samantha swiftly approached it. She looked transformed. The uniform fit her well, enhancing her figure. She no longer bore the worn-out look of a struggling individual. Samantha was all smiles, revealing bright white teeth. David exited his car and strolled towards her, coming up from behind. "Hello, Samantha." Startled, she spun around. Recognizing him, she straightened up and stepped forward. "Hello, Mr. Adams," she greeted cheerfully. "How's everything? Is Margaret treating you well?" He gave her a warm smile. "Absolutely. She's a delightful lady." David was taken aback. "Really? You find Mrs. Nelson delightful?" "Yes, she's quite nice. He regarded Samantha with a skeptical look, as though questioning her sanity. Holding his gaze on her, he slowly headed towards the office. Samantha, taken aback by his response, wondered if she had said something wrong. After he vanished behind the office door, she returned to her duties. Inside the office, Margaret was berating the operators. "What on earth are you two doing standing around while Samantha cleans the coffee machine?" Margaret pointed at a mass of spilled coffee. The operators hung their heads in guilt, having let a customer ask Samantha to clean up their mess. As one operator tried to speak up, Margaret silenced him, threatening, "If this happens again, you'll be the one cleaning up the entire area." Just then the operators noticed David, and Margaret spun around. Seeing David, her scowl transformed into a smile. "Mr. Adams, I was starting to think you'd forgotten us. It's good to see you." David was not only surprised but nearly lost his footing. He had never seen Margaret smile before. He also noticed she seemed a bit slimmer. "How are things, Mrs. Elson?" "Everything is wonderful, Mr. Adams. I can't express how grateful I am for Samantha." David sunk into a chair in her office, utterly confused. "I'm having trouble believing this. Is this really you, Mrs. Nelson?" Margaret broke into laughter and replied, "Indeed, it is me. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Adams. You see," she paused, gathering her thoughts before proceeding, "Samantha and I had a major argument on the first day. I was so livid I thought I'd fire her and quit myself. She came off as overly confident. But then, incredibly, we ended up chatting the whole night. Her life story is filled with hardship. I can't even put her experiences into words. She would do it more justice. Anyway, we've become great friends. She's sharp, and I dare say she could replace anyone here." "Even you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. She's well educated." "Educated? What sort of education could she possibly have?" David was flabbergasted, but Margaret only grinned. "You'll find out soon enough." David could only shake his head. "Okay, that sounds promising then. Mrs. Nelson, I've brought the invitations for the company's New Year party. Please figure out who will need to stay on duty." "Sure. Thank you, Mr. Adams." David's company always held lavish corporate parties. He spared no expense, ensuring they were held at luxurious venues and included employee bonuses. This year was no different. As his company thrived, profits soared. Compared to other businesses grappling with staff issues, David's company was thriving, all because he prioritized employee satisfaction. "Mrs. Nelson, could I trouble you for a cup of coffee?" David requested while settling in her office. "Absolutely. I'll be right back." Moments later, a plate of cookies and a cup of coffee sat before David. He noticed Margaret had also poured a cup for herself, but didn't take any cookies. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, prompting laughter from Margaret. "Don't give me that look, Mr. Adams. Yes, I'm dieting again. Samantha suggested this new diet. I've never experienced anything quite like it, so I'm sticking to it, and don't even mention my old love for sweets." David left the gas station more bewildered than when he had arrived, particularly about Samantha. She was an enigma. When he hired her, he'd only intended for her to fill a gap temporarily until he could find a more reliable replacement. He'd assumed that once she got her first paycheck, she'd disappear, maybe to buy alcohol or drugs. Yet, observing Samantha dedicatedly fulfilling her duties caused David to reconsider his earlier assumptions. "All right, whatever's going on, if things are going well, then that's excellent," he reassured himself. The ensuing months progressed with a hitch. Positive reviews for the gas station began to accumulate. Its customer service was even outshining that of other successful branches. A recent spree of shoplifting incidents abruptly ended as well. He eventually apprehended the culprit, a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge on manager Margaret. David hypothesized that Samantha's arrival had introduced a positive shift in the station's atmosphere, a change that had also influenced the former employee. Opting not to press charges, David discreetly rehired the ex-employee at another branch. One day, David received a roster of attendees for the upcoming corporate party. Noticing Samantha's name on the list gave him pause. A person barely scraping by like her likely doesn't even own a formal dress. "Well, that's not really my concern, I suppose," he pondered quietly. On the day of the party, guests started to arrive early. While David was acquainted with some, others were unfamiliar faces. Recognizing the women proved challenging. Accustomed to their usual uniforms, David found it hard to identify them, as they were all elegantly dressed for the festivities. The restaurant teetered on full capacity. David mingled with his familiar employees, engaging in light-hearted chit-chat as the formal ceremonies drew nearer. He found himself repeatedly looking over the main entrance. For some reason, he was anticipating Samantha's arrival. His curiosity twirled between wondering what attire she would wear and whether she would make an appearance at all. Briefly, he swiveled around to engage someone in conversation and was taken aback by a voice from behind. "Good evening, Mr. Adams." As he spun back around, he found himself at a loss for words, his surprise leaving him momentarily speechless. "Hello?" The woman standing before him was breathtaking. Her ethereal beauty seemed to transcend the realm of reality. Her hairstyle was sophisticated, her makeup flawless, and her dress exquisite. The dress seemed as though it cost a fortune. Amusingly, he found himself equating the cost to a fuel truck. "You don't recognize me?" In fact, he didn't. He was certain he didn't know this young woman. If he had met her before, she would have been unforgettable. His gaze drifted towards Margaret, who stood in his peripheral vision, grinning from ear to ear. She mouthed something and after a moment nodded towards David. Suddenly, it hit him. "Samantha? Is that really you? This can't be possible." The woman erupted into a fit of laughter. "Well, as you can see, anything is possible." David blinked in astonishment. He couldn't reconcile the radiant version of Samantha standing in front of him with the version he remembered. But how? I mean, how can you explain this transformation? You insisted you needed a job and would take anything. I assumed your life had been so fraught with difficulties, you'd never be able to bounce back. Samantha broke into laughter once more. "I'm sorry for causing confusion. I would have shared my story, but you never asked." What would you have told me?" David was intrigued. "I'm all ears now." Samantha gave a gentle smile, moved towards the table, and took a seat. David trailed behind her and settled in the adjacent seat. Following a brief pause, Samantha began to speak. "Mr. Adams, thank you for employing me. I truly appreciate your kindness." However, David was aware that his act of hiring her wasn't purely out of kindness. At that time, he had been desperately in need of a gas station attendant. "So what's your backstory, Samantha? I'm struggling to grasp how you transformed from the woman I first met to this stunning figure within just a month." Samantha offered a smile and queried, "Does the name George Harrison ring a bell for you?" David furrowed his brow in thought before responding. "George Harrison, the billionaire owner of the Harrison Inn chain? Yes, I've heard of him. What does he have to do with this?" "Well, I'm actually his daughter," Samantha replied. David was momentarily stunned by the disclosure. "What? You're George Harrison's daughter? The tycoon's child?" "Indeed I am," Samantha affirmed with a smile. "You see, about a year ago, my father and I had a disastrous argument. The details are long-winded, and the cause rather foolish. I was a wild child, uninterested in becoming the person my father envisioned me to be. I simply took too many things for granted back then. Ultimately, I lashed out at my father, asserting that I could manage just fine without his support or his money. However, I was excessively emotional at the time and didn't anticipate my father would take my words to heart. He was outraged by my defiance and promptly cut off all financial support. Within days, I was penniless. The friends who had previously shown me kindness vanished the moment they realized I was broke. The initial months was unbearable. I felt like a recovering addict undergoing withdrawal symptoms. All my usual recreational activities were suddenly out of reach. My father allowed me a month to secure employment and find my own accommodation. He was unyielding in his decision. As Samantha shared her story, David sat back, astonished by the dramatic turn of events. The celebratory atmosphere of the party faded into the background as he listened to her tale with rapt attention, his eyes wide with anticipation for the next chapter. "So that's how I found myself leaving my parents' lavish home, completely clueless about my next move. I had attended one of the most prestigious private schools, but my academic performance was just satisfactory, merely to keep my father content. My first job hunt led me to a fast food outlet where they hired me as a janitor. It was then that I realized how difficult it can sometimes be to land even a simple job. It became clear to me that I had been viewing the world through rose-colored glasses, and how people could sometimes be harsh to each other for no valid reason. Samantha had previously lived a life of constant revelry, but when faced with the realities of life, she discovered that people perceived her as arrogant and unpleasant. Referencing her privileged background only seemed to worsen her image, despite the fact that she was just an ordinary girl, kind-hearted and pleasant to those around her. Throughout her job search, Samantha made another observation about people. She noticed that there were kind-hearted individuals who treated homeless people with dignity and compassion. She realized that sometimes seeking help as a homeless person could yield quicker results than as a regular person. At times, it worked as people would hastily hand her a coin, eager to dismiss her as quickly as possible. After earning her first wages at the fast food restaurant, Samantha realized that her upbringing in her affluent father's household had indeed been beneficial. She hadn't realized the wealth of knowledge she had gained about customer service and the art of attracting repeat business from observing her father. By the time she started working at the gas station, a year had passed since she had moved out of her parents' house. Samantha had set herself a challenge to start her own hotel and restaurant business to prove to her father that she had evolved, and this was the exact reason she sought employment at David's gas station. Samantha explained that initially she aimed to understand the customer flow in the area. She confessed to David that it would have been difficult to approach someone of his stature directly with a business proposition. She wanted to contribute something to his business first before making her request. David, after a thoughtful pause, finally broke the silence. "Wow, you certainly have piqued my interest now. So, what's your proposal?" Samantha's response was straightforward. "It's actually quite simple. The gas station is strategically located by a busy highway, at a spot where many travelers tend to pause and rest. I propose that we open a small hotel and a restaurant here." Upon hearing Samantha's proposal, David scrutinized her. Samantha realized she had neglected to apologize for her initial misleading appearance. "By the way, I apologize for the impression I gave you when we first met. If you are open to my proposal, I believe we can swiftly expand your business," Samantha admitted sincerely. David was taken aback. "All right. Well, that's quite a remarkable revelation about you," he acknowledged, shaking his head. "Thank you, Mr. Adams," she replied. David was still puzzled about something else. "One more question, Samantha. How did you manage to befriend Margaret? She's known to be a tough person to get along with." "Well," Samantha began, "I observed that everyone assumed Margaret was perpetually upset and impossible to communicate with. That perception became her reputation. People stopped trying to converse with her. I simply interacted with her, listened to her. She turned out to be an intriguing person. We chat often. And guess what? She's even dating someone now." Throughout the evening, David found himself instinctively gravitating towards Samantha, as though wishing to shield her from the others. He couldn't quite comprehend why he felt such a strong need to protect her. He had told her they'd have plenty of time to discuss business matters later. For now, they were just there to enjoy the party. As the night wore on, he noticed himself stealing glances at her more frequently, and he began to realize it was getting harder to distance himself from her. The sun was just beginning to cast a golden glow over the horizon as David, the usually late riser, hopped into his car. His destination was clear, the gas station. The previous night's events were still fresh in his mind. Samantha's reveal and her subsequent proposal had stirred something in him. It wasn't just the surprise that she was George Harrison's daughter or the startling transformation she had made. It was her resourcefulness, determination, and resilience that had left him deeply impressed. As he drove, he saw the city slowly come to life. His usual routine consisted of meetings, phone calls, and lots of paperwork. This morning was different. He had one primary focus: Samantha. As he approached the gas station, he spotted Samantha at her usual spot. Despite the early hour, she was already hard at work, a testament to her commitment. Her professional demeanor had barely changed from the radiant, glamorous woman who had held court at the party just hours before. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on him, it only reinforced his admiration for her. As David sat in his car, watching Samantha attentively serve the customers, He felt a sense of certainty seeping in. He pictured her in an immaculate dress and in a leadership role, steering the course of their shared enterprise. His decision was made. Samantha had proven she was not only capable of overcoming her personal obstacles, but she could also significantly contribute to his business, offering fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. Working alongside Samantha proved to be a rewarding experience for David. Her motivations extended far beyond financial gain, something that was a refreshing departure from what David was accustomed to in the world of business. Having been exposed to immense wealth from a young age, Samantha had a perspective that was different from the norm. Monetary success wasn't her endgame. Instead, she was passionately focused on creating and sustaining a thriving hotel and restaurant business. She brought to the table an infectious enthusiasm and a commitment that was unwavering. Every decision she made, every idea she suggested, was driven by a genuine desire to create an establishment that would be known for its quality and excellent customer service. Mr. Harrison, Samantha's father, was a clever man. He might have appeared to let his daughter wander off on her own, but he always had his eyes on her. He knew where she was and what she was doing at all times, but he chose to keep his distance. Throughout the year, he observed his daughter's struggles and successes from afar, feeling an overwhelming urge many times to abandon his resolve and rush to her side to offer comfort and support. But he saw that she was battling her own demons and enduring some truly challenging times, and he believed that intervening would rob her of the lessons she needed to learn. In a way, he applied his business acumen to his personal situation, understanding the value of patience and letting things unfold naturally. When he learned about Samantha's ambitious plans to partner with David and launch a hotel and restaurant, relief washed over him. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. His little girl was growing up, learning life's hard lessons, and was now on her way to becoming a successful entrepreneur. Samantha's transformation from a reckless party girl to a determined businesswoman filled him with immense pride and satisfaction. The struggle had been worth it. His daughter had finally found her path. David found himself grappling with emotions that extended far beyond the boundaries of a professional relationship. Unbeknownst to Samantha, he was nurturing a growing affection for her, a secret love that stirred within him. Unsure of how to express his feelings, he channeled them into ensuring her well-being and protection. His attentiveness often bordered on excessive, catching Samantha by surprise on more than one occasion. Samantha, for her part, tried to maintain an impression of neutrality, of someone who was unaffected by any underlying romantic currents. But she couldn't ignore the signals. David's consistent attention and care suggested he was far from indifferent towards her. It stirred feelings of uncertainty within her, modeling the clear boundaries of their professional relationship with subtle shades of personal affection. Within just 6 months, the petite hotel and charming restaurant were fully constructed and ready for their grand unveiling. The date for the grand opening was set, anticipation palpable in the air. One evening, a handful of days prior to the big event, David and Samantha found themselves sharing a moment of quiet in the new restaurant, enjoying cups of coffee from the newly installed machine. "Better than many cafes out there," David remarked. The high-end Italian coffee machines were a personal choice of Samantha's. Their conversation flowed seamlessly from one topic to another, a fluid exchange of ideas about upcoming tasks and general operational processes. However, Samantha seemed a tad restless, as if she was struggling to voice something. When David's train of thought finally ran out of steam, Samantha met his gaze with an intense, serious look. "Is something wrong?" David asked, puzzled by her demeanor. "You're terrible at concealing your feelings," she stated bluntly. "Pardon?" Samantha sighed heavily, rolling her eyes. Then she reached across his table, lightly touching David's hand. He jolted slightly, taken aback by her action. Samantha's smile reassured him as she finally blurted out, "Aren't you going to ask me out already?" That evening marked a new chapter in Samantha and David's relationship, propelling it from professional partnership to a romantic liaison. David found the shift quite challenging initially, struggling to reconcile the image of his business partner with that of his girlfriend. Whenever she spoke, he would find himself lost in her words, simply staring at her in a daze, struggling to stay focused. Throughout this transition, Samantha retained a professional demeanor during working hours, only letting her softer side show outside of work. 2 days before the grand opening, Samantha decided to extend an invitation to her parents. Mr. Harrison, watching his daughter alight from a modest Toyota sedan parked in front of their family home, felt an assurance wash over him. His beloved daughter had indeed changed. Despite being able to afford a more luxurious vehicle, she opted for a middle-range sedan. "Mom? Dad?" Samantha walked into the house, a welcoming smile adorning her face. Mr. Harrison, who was in the living room immersed in his newspaper, looked up to see his daughter. "Hey, Dad. It's been a while. How have you been?" Mr. Harrison got up, his face breaking into a warm smile. He moved towards Samantha, pulling her into a heartfelt embrace. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." Samantha looked up at her father, her eyes welling up with tears. A realization dawned on her. Her father had been aware of her struggles and whereabouts all along. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for teaching me the most valuable lesson of my life." She then turned her gaze towards David, a radiant smile gracing her lips. "I presume you already know your future son-in-law." Mr. Harrison turned towards David, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. "Well, I've done my part. Now it's your turn to either cry or celebrate with her. I'm just going to sit back, relax, and await the arrival of my grandkids." The grand opening was a tremendous success. It exuded an atmosphere akin to a pre-wedding celebration. The hotel and restaurant operations ran smoothly. While there wasn't an immediate surge of customers, this didn't worry Samantha or David. Samantha, consumed by her work and passion for the project, cherished each customer interaction. During the first few weeks, she personally greeted customers in the hotel lobby, offering them a brief tour and ensuring they felt welcomed and appreciated. At times, David would gaze at Samantha, completely awestruck. He found himself questioning why he had been so blessed in life. Why had he been given this radiant, extraordinary woman to stand by his side? He couldn't quite discern the answer, but perhaps it was because, despite enduring many trials, including the pain of never having known his parents, he had always maintained an attitude of gratitude for everything he had. A year later, Samantha and David exchanged their vows. They chose to have an intimate wedding, inviting only their closest friends and family. Among the guests was the radiant Mrs. Nelson. She looked completely transformed, having shed significant weight and gaining an air of confidence that was hard to miss. She continued her role as the manager at the gas station, a job she journeyed to every day, accompanied by her boyfriend, a close friend of Mr. George Harrison. During the wedding, she was dressed in an elegant gown that perfectly complemented her newfound poise. Her transformation was a source of joy for everyone who knew her, and seeing her glowing at the wedding, it was clear she too had found happiness amidst all the changes. Mrs. Nelson approached David and said, "Congratulations! I'm so thrilled for both of you. You both truly deserve all this happiness." She was about to walk away but paused, turning back to look at David. Her usually jovial expression shifted momentarily to a kind of melancholy. "Thank you, David," she murmured, her words heavy with sincerity. Then the smile returned, lighting up her face once more. David watched her walk away, a knowing look in his eyes. He didn't need to question the meaning behind her words. He knew exactly what she was thanking him for. David, an orphan, had grown up craving the warmth of family and the bond of blood. Samantha's parents, with their generous hearts and open arms, filled this void in David's life. They welcomed him as their own, not merely as their daughter's partner, but as their son. Their love for him was unconditional, and it shone through every interaction, every shared meal, every shared moment. The story of Samantha and David was more than just a love story. It was a tale of resilience, of learning and growing through life's trials and tribulations. It was about a woman who refused to let her privileged background define her, and a man who found love and family in the most unexpected places. Frank had spent 20 years of his life serving in the Marines. He was a brave and courageous soldier who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. He missed the sense of purpose and camaraderie that he had in the military, and he struggled with the transition to civilian society. Frank's difficulty adjusting to civilian life was compounded by the fact that he didn't have any prior experience with managing finances. He found himself struggling to make ends meet, and was constantly worried about money. As time went on, Frank became increasingly isolated and lonely. He struggled to connect with others and found himself turning to alcohol as a way to cope with his feelings of isolation and stress. This only made matters worse, and Frank found himself spiraling out of control. Eventually, Frank lost his housing, which he had waited 6 years to get. He was now homeless and living on the streets, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few coins that he managed to beg for each day. Frank felt like he had hit rock bottom and didn't know how to get back on his feet. Frank meandered through the well-known streets of his hometown, his thoughts stuck in a loop, replaying a particular day from his past. It was a day he lost a comrade during a special operation, and he couldn't shake the memory. His mind was like a hamster wheel, always spinning until he turned to alcohol to escape the pain. As he strolled by a row of shops, his attention was drawn to a hair salon, its bright sign a beacon against the gray backdrop of the street. Frank caught his own reflection in the window, and he stopped in his tracks, momentarily stunned by what he saw. The man staring back at him was a far cry from the soldier he once was. His hair was overgrown and unkempt, and his beard had grown to a length that obscured his features. Frank felt a pang of shame, realizing how far he had fallen. He had become one of the many homeless veterans who roamed the streets, forgotten by society and left to fend for himself. As he continued to stare at his reflection, Frank felt a sense of determination wash over him. He knew he needed to make a change, to reclaim his dignity and start anew, but the path ahead was uncertain, and he wondered if he had the strength to face it. With a few begged coins clutched tightly in his hand, Frank hesitated outside the hair salon, uncertain if he had enough. Summoning the courage to enter, he was met with disdainful looks from the staff, one of whom even wrinkled her nose and commented on his odor. Frank felt embarrassed and ashamed as he tried to explain the situation. I'm sorry. I know I don't smell great, but do you think you could give me a quick buzz cut? He said softly. Olivia rolled her eyes and shook her head. Sorry, buddy, we're not a charity here. You should try looking for cans in the trash instead, she said, pointing to a nearby bin. Feeling embarrassed and dejected, Frank turned to leave the salon. As he was about to walk out the door, he heard one of the girls snicker and whisper something to her colleague. What a loser, the girl said, loud enough for Frank to hear. I can't believe he even thought we would let him in here looking like that. The other girls laughed along with her, making Frank feel even more ashamed. Frank took a deep breath and tried to hold back his tears as he walked away from the salon. He couldn't help but feel like he didn't belong in this world anymore. He had given his all to his country, and this was how he was treated. It was a harsh reality that he had to face every day. Frank went out without saying anything back because he saw no point in reacting to something he was already used to. When he was outside, a young girl walked towards the salon. Rachel took one look at Frank and said, "Nice hairstyle, sir." She thought he had already gotten a haircut. "Thanks, but I don't really like it." Frank laughed and walked past her. Rachel was confused. "Sir, you just came out of our salon. Would you like to get your hair redone?" Frank stopped and looked at her with a smile on his face for a while. "Thank you, sweetheart. Your friends didn't have time for me," Frank said, trying not to blame them. Rachel thought it was strange because there were 2 available hairstylists. "Sir, come on in. I'll fix your hair," Rachel offered. Frank sighed and felt like he was forced to tell her what really happened. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sir. I just got to work. Let me give you a nice one to make it up. I'm full of energy right now." Rachel smiled. "I'm sorry, honey, but I can't even pay you. I only got a quarter and a dime. Do you think you could just give me a buzz cut?" "Sure, sir. Come on in. I can give you a buzz cut if you want to, but I think I can give you something else that you will really like." Rachel smiled and asked Frank to come in, holding the door. Rachel and Frank walked into the salon. Olivia couldn't help but notice them and let out a slight groan. "Oh, here we go again," she thought to herself. Rachel, oblivious to Olivia's reaction, walked over to the receptionist and greeted her with a smile. "Hey Tina, can you please call the lady that had an appointment for 10 and ask if she can come later? Like say 11:20? She asked cheerfully. "Why? What happened?" Tina asked. "Oh, I've got a client here." Rachel looked at Frank. Tina looked Frank up and down. "We kicked this guy out just before he came in. What did he tell you to get you to do his hair?" Tina asked. "Hey, Tina, take it easy, alright?" "Jesus," Rachel replied, taking off her jacket. "Rachel, you sound like you know this bum. Why do you even care?" Or is he your father? Tina asked and laughed. Rachel looked up at her anger building up. But then she remembered that she needed to control her emotions and not go down on her level. She sighed and said, "Sure. What if he is my father? What then?" Frank stood there not knowing what to do. He didn't want to cause any trouble or get them to call the police. He just wanted to leave at that moment. Olivia walked out from another room. She saw Frank standing there and sighed. "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to stay away from here?" Rachel turned to Olivia, a bit surprised. "Oh, hi, Olivia. How are you?" she asked, trying to make small talk. Olivia put on a fake smile. "I'm fine, thanks," she replied before turning back to her magazine. Rachel, sensing the tension in the air, decided to just ignore Olivia and focused on her client. The girls continued to make unpleasant comments and Rachel tried to reason with them, but it only made the situation worse. Frank could see how upset Rachel was getting and apologized for causing trouble. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I'm just gonna take off. I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. Thank you so much." Frank got up and began to leave. "No, sir, you have done nothing wrong. These girls need to learn some manners and not judge people based on their appearance," Rachel was shouting at girls. "You guys are pathetic. I can't believe I've been working with you." Rachel was furious. She grabbed her jacket and left, slamming the door. "Rachel, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about what happened." Frank was apologetic. "It's been just 2 weeks, sir. It's not a big deal. I will manage. And I'm still gonna make sure you get a haircut, alright?" Rachel was determined. They left the salon and Rachel offered to go to her place where she could give him a nice haircut. After Rachel was done cutting Frank's hair, she suggested, "You can take a shower and relax a bit." Frank hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, feeling grateful for Rachel's kindness. As he took a warm shower, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the feeling of being clean again after such a long time. "Wow, this feels amazing," he thought to himself. When he stepped out of the shower, Frank was surprised at how much better he looked with a new haircut and trimmed beard. He stood in front of the mirror for a while, admiring his reflection and feeling a newfound sense of confidence. But as he continued to look at himself, he suddenly felt a wave of sadness wash over him. "This is how I used to look before I became homeless," he thought, his eyes swelling up with tears. Rachel noticed Frank's sudden change in demeanor and approached him with concern. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Frank wiped away his tears and managed a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, I never realized how much I had lost until now," he said, his voice breaking a little. Rachel nodded understandingly. "I get it, but remember, this is just the beginning. You can get back on your feet and have a better life again," she said, giving him a supportive hug. Frank felt a glimmer of hope in his heart, grateful for Rachel's words of encouragement. "Thank you," feeling a renewed sense of determination to turn his life around. As they sat together sipping coffee, Frank told Rachel his story and how he ended up on the streets. Rachel was moved by Frank's story and realized how many people like him could be struggling on the streets. Rachel pondered how she could use her time productively now. After all, she wasn't going back to the salon. She wasn't that good yet, and therefore still on probation. She looked at Frank, and it dawned on her. "Mr. Nash, do you know a lot of people that are homeless?" Rachel asked suddenly. "Yeah, I know a few," Frank replied. Rachel had an idea to practice her hairstyling skills by giving haircuts to homeless people for free. As she considered this, she thought it might be helpful to have some company and turned to Frank. "Mr. Nash," she said, "I know this is a bit unconventional, but would you like to join me in going around and offering haircuts to those in need?" Frank, with plenty of time on his hands, readily agreed. Rachel and Frank approached their first customer for their new initiative, a homeless man named Mark, who happened to be a longtime friend of Frank's. As they made their way over to him, Mark was caught off guard and surprised to see Rachel with Frank, but he didn't initially recognize Frank due to his neat attire. It wasn't often that someone dressed so nicely would even acknowledge him, let alone strike up a conversation. "Hey Mark, how's it going?" Frank greeted him warmly. Mark was taken aback. "Frank, is that really you?" Frank laughed. "Yeah man, it's me. Listen, Rachel and I are starting a new project, and we thought you might be interested." Mark looked skeptical. "What kind of project?" "We're giving free haircuts to homeless people in the area," Rachel chimed in. Mark's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, that's really kind of you guys. Most people just ignore us or avoid us altogether. We're not most people, Frank said with a grin. So, what do you say? Want a trim? Mark hesitated for a moment before finally nodding his head. Sure, why not? Can't remember the last time I got a haircut. Rachel and Frank exchanged a look of excitement as they began to set up their makeshift salon. It was just the beginning of what they hoped would be a meaningful and impactful project. As they worked, they discovered something surprising. Many of these people were skilled professionals who had fallen on hard times. They met former engineers, chefs, and even a former lawyer. Inspired by the resilience and talents of the people they met, Rachel began sharing their stories on social media, hoping to raise awareness about the issue of homelessness. To her surprise, the posts went viral, and soon social media users from all over were donating money to their cause. With these funds, Rachel and Frank were able to expand their outreach, offering not only haircuts but also job training, resume building, and networking opportunities to the homeless individuals they encountered. They were determined to help people get back on their feet and reclaim their lives. In just under 2 months, Frank and Rachel had made remarkable progress in their mission to help the homeless. With the support of generous donors and their tireless efforts, they were able to assist many people in need. The work had also helped Frank. He was no longer living on the streets and had a newfound sense of purpose. Rachel recognized Frank's dedication and hard work and offered them a place to stay and help with their growing charity. Together, they decided to establish a non-profit organization dedicated to helping the homeless community. The charity gained momentum quickly, with more volunteers and donations pouring in each day. Rachel's passion and leadership skills soon made her the natural choice to lead the organization, and she became its chairwoman. Frank took on an administrative role, helping to manage the day-to-day operations and ensuring that the charity stayed true to its mission of helping people get back on their feet. Together, they continued to make a positive impact on the lives of those who had fallen on hard times. Once, Frank and Rachel were enjoying a peaceful afternoon lounging on the grassy lawn of the park. Frank had a content smile on his face as he reflected on his work. "This kind of work reminds me of my days in the Marines," he said. "I love being part of a team and working alongside truly loyal people." Rachel sat beside him, appearing more subdued than usual. Frank noticed her demeanor and grew concerned. "Is everything okay, Rachel?" Rachel took a deep breath, gathering her courage before confiding in Frank. "My dad was actually killed when he was in the Marines," she revealed, her voice soft and trembling with emotion. Frank's expression softened as he reached out to comfort her. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. That must have been incredibly difficult for you." Rachel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "It was, but talking to you about it actually helps. It's not something I usually talk about." Frank nodded in understanding. "I get it. It's not easy to open up about something like that, but I'm here for you, Rachel. You can always talk to me." Rachel managed a small smile through her tears, feeling grateful for Frank's kind words and support. "Thank you, Frank. That means a lot." Ever since Rachel's father passed away, she had been searching for people who had served in the Marines. She believed that listening to their stories would bring back fond memories of her father's pride and eventually help her overcome her grief. What Frank didn't know was that when Rachel first saw Frank, she knew he was a former Marine based on his behavior and mannerisms. Their friendship deepened, strengthened by their shared experiences and their commitment to making a positive impact in the world. They knew that together, they could accomplish great things and help many people in need. As Rachel and Frank walked home from work one day, they happened to pass by the hair salon where Frank was denied a haircut. Memories flooded back to them, and Frank couldn't help but stop and look at the place. "Remember this place?" Frank asked, a smile spreading across his face. "Of course I do," Rachel replied with a grin. "This is where it all began." Just then, Olivia came outside and saw Rachel and Frank standing there. She looked at Rachel with a sneer and addressed Frank. "Is this woman bothering you, Mr. Nash?" Rachel was taken aback by Olivia's hostility and looked at Frank with a puzzled expression. "Not at all, Olivia," Frank said with a smile. "In fact, Rachel is the new owner of the salon." Olivia's face fell. She didn't understand what was going on, but a moment later, she realized that the man she had previously kicked out of the salon was the same man who had bought it. She felt embarrassed and ashamed of her behavior towards Frank, and Rachel could see the guilt written all over her face. Olivia hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm sorry for how I treated you before, Mr. Nash," she said and ran back inside. She didn't know whether to stay or leave. Rachel was taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. It transpired that Frank and some of his fellow charity workers had been on the lookout for a hair salon that would cater to everyone, regardless of their background or financial situation. They had come across the owner of the salon who was struggling and expressed her willingness to sell it. Frank and his team seized the opportunity and decided to gift the salon to Rachel as a token of appreciation for her hard work and dedication. When Frank shared the news with Rachel, she was overwhelmed and couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You guys bought me a hair salon?" she exclaimed. "Yes, we did," Frank confirmed with a grin. "It's all yours, Rachel." Tears of joy streamed down Rachel's face as she hugged Frank tightly. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Frank patted her back and said, "You deserve it, Rachel. You've been working hard and we wanted to show you our appreciation. We hope this will help you achieve your dreams." Rachel smiled through her tears, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and excitement. She was grateful for the support and encouragement she had received from Frank and the charity workers. As the group stood outside the newly acquired salon, they watched as the workers put up a brand new sign that read, "Rachel's." Rachel felt a sense of pride and accomplishment as she gazed at the sign, realizing that her dream was finally coming to fruition. "I can't believe this is happening," Rachel said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's real, Rachel," Frank said reassuringly, "and it's all yours." Rachel couldn't stop smiling as she walked towards the entrance of the salon, her heart bursting with excitement. "I want to offer free haircuts to all the homeless people in our community," she declared. "Anytime they need it, no questions asked." The group looked at each other, all nodding in agreement. "I'm not surprised at all," Frank said and smiled. The charity also continued to grow, and Frank finally found a purpose in life. He learned to live in the civilian world, had a place to call home, and a job he loved, helping people in need. Frank and Rachel's charity had given hope to the homeless, and it showed that a little kindness can go a long way. As Ethan gathered his belongings and got ready to take his daughters to school, he couldn't help but appreciate the beauty of the day. The sun was shining, and there was a gentle breeze in the air. He felt grateful for this moment. As he loaded his daughters into the car, they chatted and laughed, excited for the day ahead. As he drove, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and joy, seeing his daughters growing up into beautiful young ladies. As they arrived at the school, Ethan said his goodbyes to them and watched them walk through the gates. After that, he drove to the office. Ethan walked confidently through the bustling offices of Arnold & Associates, a leading business consultancy firm. As the chief executive officer, his days were a blend of strategic decision-making, innovative project development, and nurturing client relationships. Known for his groundbreaking approaches in business strategy, particularly in leveraging emerging technologies, Ethan had transformed his company into a beacon of innovation and success in the business world. His office, lined with shelves displaying books on the latest business theories and market trends, was a testament to his dedication to continuous learning. On his desk, amidst an array of reports and data analysis tools, stood a miniature model of a globe, symbolizing his company's international reach and his global perspective on business. Despite his many achievements, Ethan carried his success with modesty. His colleagues admired him for his calm and strategic approach, particularly in high-stakes negotiations and crucial business decisions. More than just a shrewd businessman, Ethan was also a mentor, investing time in guiding young professionals in their careers. His passion for business was matched by his commitment to staying ahead of industry trends, often leading his firm to adopt innovative practices that set new standards in the industry. Ethan's success was not just measured in profit margins and market shares, but also in the respect and trust he earned from his clients and the gratitude of the professionals he mentored. His ability to blend sharp business acumen with a genuine concern for the well-being and development of his team made him not just a leader in his field, but a respected and admired figure in the business community. Today marked a milestone in his life as he prepared to launch his foundation. Months of meticulous planning and organization for the event were finally coming to fruition, a dream he nurtured to profoundly impact the lives of those battling cancer. But what made this day truly heartwarming was the presence of his parents. Ethan had arranged for his parents to fly in from their quaint hometown. The moment they arrived, the air was filled with an emotional mix of pride and joy. His mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she looked around the venue, her heart swelling at the thought of her son making such a significant difference. His father, usually reserved, wore a broad smile, his eyes reflecting a sense of fulfillment as he witnessed the culmination of their hard work. The foundation's launch was more than just a professional endeavor for Ethan. It held a profound and deeply personal significance. Ethan grew up in a small, cozy town up north, where life was simple, but not always easy. His family didn't have a lot of money. His dad worked hard, fixing trucks at the local garage all day to make ends meet, while his mom was a nurse, caring for people at the town's hospital. He had an older brother, Tom. When they were kids, Ethan and Tom didn't always get along. Ethan was a bit grumpy and got annoyed easily, especially with Tom. He would often go to his parents complaining, "Tom won't share his toys with me," even when it wasn't really true. Tom, on the other hand, was more laid back. He liked playing with Ethan and didn't mind the small fights too much. Their parents usually took Ethan's side, though. His mom would often say to Tom, "You need to be nice to your little brother," making Tom feel a bit unfair. But Tom never held it against Ethan. He knew that's just how little brothers could be sometimes. Ethan was really smart in school. He was great at math and learning new languages. Understanding hard stuff like big ideas and theories was easy for him. He always caught on to new things super fast. His big brother, Tom, wasn't the same in school. Tom found schoolwork tough and often got low grades, but he loved sports. He was awesome at basketball and baseball in junior high, and everyone knew him for being great at playing them. Even though he loved sports, keeping up with school was hard for Tom when he was busy with games and practice. When Tom was 7, he got really sick with an infection. Their parents tried lots of medicines for 2 weeks, but nothing worked. Then the doctors gave him strong antibiotics. They finally made him better, but something wasn't right after that. Tom didn't seem to hear when their parents called him. One day, their mom said worriedly to their dad, "Do you notice Tom isn't here as lately?" After a few tests, the doctors discovered that the antibiotics had affected Tom's hearing, making it hard for him to hear well. This was a big change for Tom and the whole family. While their parents were at work, Tom took on the role of looking after his younger brother and handling the household chores. Their family had a cozy garden filled with apple trees and various vegetables, a place Tom loved. He always jumped at the chance to work in the garden, finding peace in the outdoor tasks. It was a bright spring day, and the family was busy in their garden. Tom was busy digging a spot for a new apple tree, while his mom was weeding the vegetable patch not too far away. Suddenly, she realized she needed water for the plants. "Tom, can you grab me the water bucket, please?" she called out, expecting him to hear. But Tom, with his impaired hearing, didn't respond. Ethan, noticing his brother didn't hear their mom, tried to get Tom's attention by tossing a small stone towards him, but it missed. Emily, Tom's mom, called out again, "Tom?" Still no response. She felt a surge of frustration, thinking he was ignoring her. She marched over to him and asked, a bit sternly, "Tom, didn't you hear me calling you?" Tom looked up, startled and confused. He saw the frustration on his mom's face and felt a wave of fear and confusion. He didn't know why she was upset, not realizing she hadn't remembered his hearing issue. "Tom, why aren't you answering me? I've been calling your name for the past 5 minutes," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with annoyance and concern. "Do I really have to shout every time I need you?" Tom, looking up from his digging, saw the irritation in his mother's eyes and felt a pang of guilt. He struggled to find the right words, feeling the weight of the misunderstanding. "Mom, I didn't hear you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I just didn't hear." Emily paused, her expression softening as she remembered Tom's hearing impairment. "Oh, Tom, I forgot. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have gotten upset," she said, her tone shifting to one of remorse. "It's just been a long day, and I forgot you might not hear me." As time passed, Tom's family, especially his mother Emily, tried to adapt to his hearing impairment, but it wasn't easy. Emily often found herself getting frustrated when Tom didn't respond to her calls. Her voice would rise in volume, her words sharp with irritation, which only made communication more stressful for Tom. One afternoon, while they were all in the kitchen, Emily called out to Tom to set the table. When he didn't respond, her patience snapped. "Tom, how many times do I have to say it?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. Tom, startled, turned around. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't hear you," he replied, his voice tinged with anxiety. He could feel the tension in the room, the constant fear of missing something important always looming over him. Ethan sometimes didn't make things easier. During their arguments, Ethan would often resort to mocking Tom's hearing impairment. "What? Can't hear me?" Ethan would sneer, even though he knew Tom probably couldn't hear the insults. Ironically, most of the time, Tom was oblivious to Ethan's hurtful words, but the knowledge that he was being mocked lingered in his mind, adding to his growing sense of isolation. This constant strain and worry began to take a toll on Tom. The fear of not hearing when called, the anxiety of missing out on conversations or instructions led to an unexpected issue: bedwetting. Tom, already grappling with the challenges of his impairment, now had to deal with this new, embarrassing problem, adding another layer of distress to his young life. His mother, upon discovering this, felt a mix of concern and frustration. "Tom, you're too old for this," she said one morning, her tone a blend of worry and exasperation. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Tom, feeling ashamed and overwhelmed, didn't know how to explain the anxiety that had been building up inside him. He just shrugged, wishing he could express how the fear of not hearing and the constant misunderstandings were affecting him deeply. With Tom's bedwetting becoming a new secret burden, Ethan found yet another way to taunt his brother. Whenever they had disagreements, Ethan would bring it up, using it as a weapon to get his way. At school, things weren't much better for Tom. His hearing impairment made him an easy target for teasing. While some teachers were sympathetic and tried to accommodate his needs, others seemed at a loss, uncertain how to support him. They even suggested to Tom's parents that they should find a way to fix his hearing issue. One afternoon, the tension at home reached a new peak. Ethan was eating his lunch when he accidentally knocked his bowl of soup, spilling it across the floor. Tom, hearing the clatter, came in and saw the mess. "Hey, Ethan, you need to clean this up," Tom said, trying to keep his tone calm. Ethan, still upset over spilling his soup, just shook his head and darted away, leaving Tom standing in a puddle of soup. Frustrated, Tom chased after him, grabbing Ethan's ear to stop him. "You can't just run off like that," he exclaimed. Ethan, caught off guard, started crying loudly from the surprise and pain falling to the floor. After a moment, he got up, wiped his tears, and quietly sneaked up behind Tom. "You're such a baby, always wetting the bed," Ethan whispered spitefully, knowing Tom couldn't hear him clearly. "Can't even hear a thing, can you?" Tom sensed Ethan was saying something hurtful, but couldn't catch the words. The look on Ethan's face was enough to understand the intent. Feeling a mix of sadness and frustration, Tom turned away, deciding not to engage further. He went back to the kitchen, grabbed a cloth, and started wiping the spilled soup by himself. The silence in the house was heavy, filled with unspoken words and growing divides. The family's financial struggles were a constant weight, and Ethan, being young, often didn't understand the constraints. One day, while at the grocery store, he spotted a bright red fire truck toy and immediately wanted it. "We can't afford it, Ethan. You have plenty of toys at home," Emily said gently, trying to reason with him. But Ethan, fixated on the toy, began to cry loudly, tugging at her sleeve. Emily, already worn down by the stresses of the day, snapped back. "Ethan, I said no. We're not getting the truck." Tom, silently watching the scene unfold, placed groceries on the counter, feeling a mix of empathy and helplessness. A few days later, feeling the weight of his family's financial struggles, Tom decided to take matters into his own hands. He left school early, skipping math class, which seemed pointless as his teachers hardly noticed him anymore. Roaming the neighborhood, he knocked on doors, offering to do chores for some extra cash. At the third house, an elderly woman, Mrs. Tomnett, greeted him. "Can I help you with any work for a bit of money?" Tom asked politely. Mrs. Tomnett smiled, relieved. She had several bags of garden soil in her backyard that she couldn't move herself. Tom set to work, hauling the heavy bags as the afternoon faded into evening. Exhausted but satisfied, he accepted the money Mrs. Tomnett offered him and hurried to the store before it closed. He bought the shiny red fire truck, tucking it carefully into his backpack, and raced home. When he arrived, Emily was waiting, her worry turning into frustration. "Tom, where have you been? It's late." Tom, catching his breath, replied, "I had a big assignment in school, Mom. It took longer than I thought." He didn't want to worry her with the truth, nor did he want to spoil the surprise for Ethan. Emily's frustration was evident as she confronted Tom. "What homework? You never have homework, Tom. And why are you covered in dirt? Were you messing around with Josh again?" Her voice was a mix of worry and exasperation. Tom hesitated, unsure of how to explain without revealing his secret effort to buy the toy for Ethan. "It was just a group project, Mom. We had to collect some soil samples," he lied, hoping she'd believe him. Emily's tension and frustration, which often spilled over into her interactions with her family, had roots that went much deeper than the surface-level challenges they faced daily. Her marriage with Harold had evolved into something far from the fairy tale she had once imagined. As a young woman, Emily had been utterly captivated by Harold's charm and grand dreams. He had a way of making the future seem bright and full of possibilities. She had envisioned a glamorous life in the city filled with excitement and adventure, a stark contrast to her current reality. Their financial difficulties began to strain the marriage early on. Emily, who was used to a comfortable lifestyle provided by her affluent parents, struggled to adapt to their more modest living conditions. Harold, who came from a working-class family, worked tirelessly to make ends meet, but it was never quite enough. He couldn't give Emily the luxurious life she had been accustomed to, and this gap between expectation and reality became a constant source of tension. "Harold, when will things change? When will we live the life you promised me?" Emily would often ask in moments of despair, her voice tinged with a mixture of hope and disappointment. Harold, feeling the weight of unmet promises, would reply, "I'm trying, Emily. I'm doing all I can, but these things take time." Emily's parents had been skeptical of Harold from the beginning, warning her that the marriage was doomed to face hardships. Despite her defiance at the time, Emily now found herself questioning her decision, her parents' words echoing in her mind during her weaker moments. This underlying discontent often manifested in her interactions with her children, unintentionally letting her own frustrations affect her patience and understanding. Harold and Emily's unfulfilled dreams and the stark reality of their life created an atmosphere of unspoken disappointment, affecting not just their relationship, but also the overall mood in the household. When Tom was born, Emily's discontent only grew. Raising a child with limited resources was challenging, and she often found herself comparing her current life unfavorably with her affluent upbringing. Harold felt the strain too, distancing himself from Emily's family and their criticisms. He had once promised Emily that he would make all her dreams come true, but as years passed, that promise seemed more and more like a distant dream. The stress of Emily and Harold's strained relationship, coupled with their ongoing financial struggles, cast a shadow over the household. This tension didn't go unnoticed by Tom, who felt the growing responsibility to lift the spirits of his family, especially his younger brother Ethan. His latest effort was a secret mission to buy Ethan the toy fire truck he had longed for. Standing before his parents, Tom's clothes were stained with mud from the day's work. Emily, already frayed from the day's challenges, lost her temper at the sight. "Tom, look at the state of you. How can you just stand there smiling? Go and clean up now," she scolded. But Tom's smile didn't waver. Hidden in his backpack was the reason for his joy. The fire truck for Ethan. He knew the scolding was worth it. Ethan, in the way of younger siblings, found humor in Tom's predicament, giggling at the scene. His innocence shielded him from understanding the full picture, his world still simple and unburdened by the complexities troubling his parents. Once the commotion had died down and Emily's attention was elsewhere, Tom beckoned Ethan to the bathroom. With a conspiratorial grin, he reached into his backpack and carefully pulled out the shiny red fire truck. Ethan's eyes lit up with pure delight at the sight of it. He was so overcome with excitement that he started bouncing around the room, his laughter echoing off the tiles. In his enthusiasm, he accidentally bumped into the metal bucket by the bathtub, sending it clattering to the floor. The noise drew a sharp reprimand from Emily, but it couldn't dampen the brothers' joy. In that small bathroom, with the toy truck in Ethan's hands, the worries of their world seemed to momentarily fade away. Seeing Ethan so happy with the fire truck made Tom feel really good inside. He was proud that he could make his little brother smile like that. Tom loved Ethan a whole lot, and seeing him jump around and laugh with the joy in his hands was one of the best feelings in the world for Tom. It was like he had done something really special just for Ethan. The sound of laughter and the loud clatter of the bucket drew Emily's attention, and she hurried to the bathroom. Her expression turned from concern to anger as she saw the shiny red fire truck in Ethan's hands. Both boys instantly quieted down, sensing their mother's rising temper. "Where did you get that truck?" Emily demanded, looking directly at Tom. Tom remained silent, unsure of how to explain without revealing the truth. "Tom, I asked you a question. Where did you get it?" Emily's voice grew sharper with each word. After another moment of silence, suspicion crept into her tone. You didn't steal it from the store, did you? You're acting just like your father. Answer me, Tom." Tom felt a knot from his stomach. He managed a faint smile, not out of disrespect, but out of nervousness. He couldn't tell her that he had skipped class to earn the money for the truck. He knew that would only make things worse, so he stood there, head bowed, silently hoping that his mother would just let the matter go. Ethan, sensing the tension, clutched the fire truck a little tighter, his earlier joy fading into confusion and worry. The atmosphere in the bathroom had shifted from one of happiness to one of apprehension, the joy of the new toy overshadowed by their mother's anger and Tom's dilemma. The misunderstanding about the fire truck weighed heavily on Emily's mind, leading her to believe that Tom must have stolen it. Determined to set things right, she marched back to the store with Tom trailing behind her, his mind racing with worry about the consequences he might face. Upon reaching the store, Emily approached the cashier with a mix of embarrassment and resolve. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my son may have taken this toy without paying. she said, holding up the fire truck. "We couldn't afford it, and I'm afraid they might have stolen it." The cashier looked at the toy and then at Tom, a look of recognition crossing his face. "Actually, your son paid for this truck earlier today," he responded with a reassuring smile. "He did?" Emily's voice was a mix of surprise and confusion. "Yes, ma'am. He came in, paid for it, and left. No issues at all." Outside the store, the tension between Emily and Tom lingered. Finally, Emily asked, "Tom, where did you get the money for this?" Tom hesitated for a moment before explaining about the odd jobs he did for Mrs. Tomnett, including moving the heavy bags of soil. He kept his gaze fixed on the ground, not sure how his mother would react. As they walked home in silence, Emily was deep in thought. Tom didn't notice at first, but tears were silently streaming down Emily's cheeks. She was overwhelmed with a mix of guilt and admiration. Guilt for having doubted her son's integrity and admiration for his selflessness and hard work. In her mind, she replayed the many times she had been quick to judge or scold, realizing now that her son had been shouldering burdens far beyond his years. This moment of revelation was a turning point for Emily, a painful yet necessary awakening to the depth of character her young son possessed. As the years rolled by, the family's financial struggles persisted, and so did the undercurrent of discontent in their household. Emily frequently voiced her dissatisfaction to her husband about their modest living conditions, the cramped house, the aging car, and the myriad of comforts she felt she was missing out on. In the midst of this, Tom had grown into a sophomore in high school. Academically, he struggled. His teachers, having seemingly given up on him, paid him little attention. However, Tom found his passion and success in sports, which brought him a sense of achievement and joy. Ethan, 3 years Tom's junior, was flourishing in a different arena. He had a knack for math, frequently winning competitions and earning recognition as a promising student. Despite their age difference, Tom and Ethan shared a special bond over mathematics. Tom, often baffled by basic arithmetic, would pose simple problems to Ethan, who would solve them with astonishing speed. These moments were not only fun, but also a source of immense pride for Tom. He admired his younger brother's intelligence and often bragged about Ethan's achievements to anyone who would listen. Noticing that most of Ethan's friends had bicycles and seeing the longing in Ethan's eyes whenever they rode past, Tom yearned to do something about it. He didn't have the means to buy a bike, but he came up with a plan. One day, he struck a deal with a friend, trading his cherished baseball gloves for a day's use of the friend's bike. When Tom rode up to Ethan on the bike, the look of surprise and joy on Ethan's face was worth more than any possession. Ethan was over the moon with excitement. Tom dedicated the entire day to his brother, patiently pushing the bike from behind and guiding Ethan as he wobbled and pedaled. The sight of Ethan gradually gaining balance and confidence on the bike filled Tom with a deep sense of happiness and contentment. Their laughter and shouts of excitement echoed through the neighborhood, a rare and cherished moment of carefree joy amidst the challenges of their everyday life. Near the end of his sophomore year, Tom suddenly started feeling really unwell. His hearing got even worse, and he began to lose weight very fast. Within just a few weeks, he found it hard to walk around. He felt so tired all the time and just wanted to lie down. His parents were worried and confused because they didn't know what was wrong. When the doctors did some blood tests, they found out Tom had leukemia. They had found it too late, and the treatment didn't start in time. Tom became bedridden, unable to get up or walk by himself. Emily and Harold took turns missing work to stay home and take care of him. Tom got so weak that he couldn't even eat by himself. Emily fed him soft food and porridge, while Harold helped him get to the bathroom whenever he needed to go. Harold worked really hard to pay for everything. He even got a second job to help with the medical bills. At night, he would sit in the dark kitchen, quietly crying, while Emily stayed by Tom's side. After about 6 months, Tom started to lose his eyesight. Ethan, who was about to turn 12, didn't really understand what was happening at first, but as time went on, he began to realize how serious Tom's illness was. He became quieter each day, watching his big brother get sicker. Ethan would sit next to Tom for hours, asking him to play math games like they used to, but Tom could hardly move. He would just breathe heavily and stare blankly. Sometimes, he tried to turn his head towards Ethan's voice and say something, but Ethan couldn't understand him. One early morning, Ethan cried for the first time because he felt so bad for Tom. He didn't even go to school, even though he had an important math competition practice. Instead, he sat on the edge of Tom's bed, holding his hand, crying softly. His tears fell onto Tom's hand. Ethan looked at his brother, who was just lying there, his eyes open but not really seeing anything. He remembered all the times Tom had been there for him, like when he got him the red fire truck or spent hours helping him learn to ride a bike. Those memories made him cry even more. Ethan sat by Tom's bed, his voice trembling as he spoke to his brother. "I love you, Tom. Can you hear me? I love you so much. Please try to get up." His voice grew more desperate. "Come on, Tom. You have to get up. You promised you'd take me to the lake. Don't break your promise, Tom." He paused, fighting back tears, then pleaded softly. "Let's play our math game just like we used to. Please, Tom, ask me a math question. I'll get it right, I promise." As he sat there, memories of their past began to flood Ethan's mind. He remembered the times he had mocked Tom for his hearing problems, the cruel laughter when Tom couldn't catch what others said. He thought about the moments he had made fun of Tom for wetting the bed, pinching his nose in disgust. These memories, once trivial childhood squabbles, now twisted in Ethan's heart, filling him with regret and self-loathing. "I was so mean to you, Tom. I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He looked at his brother, lying motionless, and his heart ached. The playful, caring brother who had once pushed him on a bike, who had gone out of his way to get him a toy fire truck, now lay silent and unresponsive. The weight of his past actions and the current reality of Tom's condition overwhelmed Ethan. He felt a deep sense of guilt and sorrow, wishing he could turn back time and cherish every moment with Tom, be kinder and appreciate the love and care his brother had always shown him. Ethan was sitting close to Tom, his voice soft and full of hope. "Tom, please listen. I'm so sorry. Let's go to the lake, okay? Just you and me. We can ride in a boat and have a great time. Please, Tom, say something." Suddenly, Tom turned his head a little towards Ethan. A weak smile appeared on his lips, and he slowly lifted his arm, motioning for Ethan to come closer. Ethan's heart leaped with excitement, and he called out loudly, "Mom, Dad, Tom's looking at me. He's really looking. Come quick." Emily and Harold hurried into the room, their faces lighting up as they saw Tom looking at them too. They gathered around his bed, and Tom seemed to be trying to say something. It was hard for him, but he was trying. Tom's voice was barely a whisper. "What is it, honey?" Emily leaned in, trying to hear him. "Ethan, promise me," Tom managed to say. "Promise to send Ethan to a good school. He's smart, way smarter than me. He's got a bright future." Tears started rolling down Emily's cheeks as she listened to Tom's words. Harold, holding Tom's hand, wept quietly too, moved by the love and care Tom showed for his brother even in his own difficult time. Emily gently cradled Tom's head, kissing his forehead tenderly. "We love you so much, Tom," she said softly. "Please forgive us. You're our precious boy." The evening after Tom made his heartfelt request, the family faced the unimaginable. Tom passed away. The loss was profound and sudden, leaving everyone in a state of deep grief. Ethan, overwhelmed by the loss of his beloved brother, screamed and cried inconsolably for 3 days straight, unable to come to terms with the reality that Tom was gone. In the days following the funeral, A heavy silence hung over the house. Emily and Harold, each lost in their own sorrow, found words inadequate to express their pain. They barely spoke to each other, the quiet only broken by the occasional sounds of daily life. About a month after Tom's passing, Emily was in his room, folding his clothes, a task that felt both mundane and heart-wrenching. It was then that Ethan entered the room. His eyes, still red from tears, scanned the room that once buzzed with his brother's presence. "Mom, can I keep Tom's clothes? Can I wear them?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a vulnerability in his request, a longing to hold on to something tangible of Tom. Emily looked up, her heart aching at the request, but she understood his need to feel close to Tom. "Of course, Ethan. You can keep whatever you want," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The house remained quiet in the following weeks. The absence of Tom's laughter and chatter left a noticeable void. Ethan, who had always been buoyed by his brother's presence, now retreated further into silence. His world, once filled with shared jokes and playful bickering, felt empty. Remembering Tom's last words, Ethan found a new purpose amidst his grief. He dedicated himself to his studies, channeling all his energy into excelling academically. It was his way of honoring Tom, of keeping a promise to his brother who believed in him so much. He worked tirelessly, driven by the memory of Tom's faith in his potential and the desire to fulfill the future that Tom had envisioned for him. As Ethan stood on the cusp of adulthood, graduating high school and looking towards college, Harold made significant sacrifices to ensure his son could pursue higher education. He sold nearly everything he could to fund Ethan's studies. The commitment paid off when 4 years later, Ethan graduated from a prestigious business school, laying the foundation for a successful career. He started his own company, which over time grew into a significant holding. In the midst of his burgeoning career, Ethan met Amanda, a kind and beautiful woman of Latin American heritage. She embodied all the qualities Ethan had hoped to find in a partner. Their connection was instant and deep, leading to a loving marriage and the joy of 3 beautiful daughters. One morning, as Ethan watched his daughters get into the car for school, he instructed his driver to pick up his parents from the airport. They were arriving for a very special occasion, the opening ceremony of the Tom Arnold's Cancer Treatment Foundation. The ceremony was a significant event for the city, attracting attention and anticipation. Ethan, standing at the podium, delivered a heartfelt speech. "Tom Arnold was a man with an immense and pure heart. He shaped me into the person I am today," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "My brother taught me the values of love and kindness, lessons I carry with me every day." In the front row, Harold and Emily Arnold sat hand in hand, tears streaming down their faces as they listened to their son honor the memory of their late son. Amanda, sitting proudly with their daughters beside Ethan's parents, beamed with happiness and pride. She felt incredibly fortunate to be part of Ethan's life, to share in his journey and his achievements. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at home, sharing memories of Tom. Ethan often dreamt of his brother, in dreams where Tom brought him sweets and carried them on his back. These dreams were a bittersweet reminder of the bond they shared. Ethan deeply missed Tom and often reflected on how love and kindness are life's most precious gifts, sometimes fully appreciated only in the wake of loss.